Before the Rings of Power, there were the Silmarils. Before Sauron, there was his master Morgoth. Before Aragorn and Arwen, there was Beren and Luthien. Join us as we explore Tolkien and all the ages of Middle-earth with your hosts from theonering.com, Jonathan Watson and Michael Grumbine.
It's a new week, and that means another change of the so many changes in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings films.
We'll basically be doing these until we're old men.
No, we won't have any listeners left.
That's right.
I think that I see our downloads going down a little bit. I'm like, maybe people aren't that interested in these changes. They're good filler episodes, but I think we need to go back to reading something. If you have any suggestions on what to read, send me an email, jonathan@theonering.com. I mean, we have some options out there, and I know some of them are short, but I think we might have to go back to a big book, one of the biggies soon.
Oh yeah? Did you have something in mind?
Not yet. We're not going to tell people anyway if we do, because we're not committing until we're committed.
Definitely it's like telling. Definitely not the Children of Hurin. Definitely not.
Oh man, that would be awesome. That would be so good. I'd love that. It's kind of like, you never promise your kids anything, because then you'll never have to say I went back on my promises. So they're like, can we go to the park tomorrow? I'm like, I'm not going to say yes or no.
Right. We're going to stand by our mediocrity. That's what we're going to do.
Wait, no. Hey, well, we're going to jump into some mediocrity here in a minute with a new video game coming out. That Weta was actually involved in. Peter Jackson's special effects studio was involved in building, though honestly you couldn't tell it by the visuals of the film or the game. But hey, we'll see.
Highly stylized.
Today we're going to be checking out the removal of the Barrow-downs. Which you might think isn't that important, but in fact, there is something really important that happens in the Barrow-downs that we're going to go over that is just kind of gone, and nobody really thinks about it, but it's kind of a big deal because it speaks so much to the world of Middle-earth and how important the history is that determines the future, and how everything, as Michael likes to say, everything was better in the past. Everything. Entropy is real when it comes to the quality of things in Middle-earth.
In Tolkien's world, that's absolutely true. In the real world, that's much of the time true.
we're not being committal to anything particular. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to have an extended edition where we're going to talk about a couple questions from some folks in our in our Discord chat, which you can get by going to theonering.com/member, become a member. Go to theonering.com/Patreon, become a member there. It's free for the first month, so check it out. Some good folks in there, and you get our extended podcast, and we'll do some live chats again soon. Tried to have one last Saturday night, but I think everybody's busy on a Saturday night. I'm not sure. We're going to have to figure out what time is great for most people, but we'll do that again. So go to theonering.com/member, become a member, and get our access to our entire Discord community, not just the freeloader community, which you can get to by clicking the link in the show notes below. And join us there. Yeah, it'd be great to have you. You can ask these questions that all these folks ask about the changes in the Lord of the Rings. And when we get back to reading a book, I think we'll get even more questions. I think that's more real. People really want that. So we'll go into there. All right. So before we get into the Barrow-downs, I think it was last week, I'm going to hang on until you're back, Michael, because this is the part that's going to become part of the video, the clip. So sorry, I know.
Sorry about
walk by and stuff. No, it's okay. All right. We're going to take a look at a video game that's kind of surprised everybody with it, one, coming out, and two, it itself, the premise of it. So we're gonna take a look at the clips from it. We're gonna kind of fast forward through the video and give some of our takes on this game. Now let's not forget the last game that came out was the Gollum game, which I live streamed twice and I just couldn't take it anymore. It was the worst video game experience I've had in a long time.
I watched you and I felt like it was the worst video game experience I'd had ever. So,
it ruined the studio. The studio is not making games anymore. So There's that. Yeah. It was a horrible game. Hopefully this isn't quite as bad, but it's sort of the diametric opposite. Instead of the bad guy, you're being the bad guy, you're being the good guys, and there's only good things to do. Whereas before you were the bad guy with doing only bad things. like sneaking up on orcs and hitting them over the head. And then it didn't work over and over and over and over and over again. You can see that video. Maybe I'll link it below. That was so frustrating. Okay. So this game is called Tales of the Shire, and we're going to pause it in certain places. Yell out if you want me to pause it, Michael. But here we go.
There are many tales of Middle-earth. Tales of courage and...
When I first saw this, by the way, the visuals, I was like, oh, that's pretty. What is there's flat, like, so I posted on Twitter, like, 2003, 2003 called and wants their graphics back. Because it really looks like, I don't know, there's a game, there's like a black and white, I think it was called, a God game, like where you can control a bunch of things. And this is what it looks like. It's so flat, the animation, it's so bland. And I was kind of surprised at how bad it was.
Well, yeah, and I think the people that do this, I don't think they think it's bad. I think they're making an artistic decision, and they think it has this sort of...
Okay, but
yeah,
watch. There is bad stuff in here.
I know.
Brave deeds in dark.
That's bad.
Yes.
The animation, there's no movement. Like there's no, like it's almost like he's walking in water and there's no splashing. There's nothing going on.
Right.
It's very cell animated looking, and I find it a little off-putting.
Yeah, there's no interaction between the ground and his foot, which is what you would expect.
Which, in this day and age, come on, can we get just a little bit?
But that is not our story. For this is one of new beginnings.
And this was like, oh, it's Sim Hobbit.
That's right. That's exactly right.
It's Sim Hobbit because it's a beginning, right? We get to start. There you go, at the beginning. I guess that's by one. Maybe? Bridge? I don't know who Private Division is, but they're presenting this.
They're very private. You're never going to know.
They're very divisive, too, apparently. That was surprising. What a workshop on here. Wow.
Yeah, I wonder how they get the tag for that.
Here's my thought. Somebody paid them a lot of money to get their names on it and to have like about 4 to 6 hours of consultation on it, and that's about it. They're like, okay, so in this part, can you show us the map that you made of the Shire, and we're going to kind of copy that, and that's about it. I wouldn't be surprised if, I don't know. It just doesn't feel like something that Weta would want to put out. It's also pastoral. So there's a guy fishing. Or girl? Guy, girl. What do you think, Michael? In this day and age, it doesn't matter.
Yes, it does.
Sorry.
It still matters. It's a girl, definitely. So what's fascinating to me is the game, the Lord of the Rings game that I reference with some frequency that myself and my family plays, which is Lord of the Rings Online. Old game, but still well done from a lore perspective. This kind of thing was like a side game. There's like fishing side games inside. Like if you want to, you can hang out and do a side game of fishing, and you can collect all these different fish from different rivers and the Shire and even other places. And there's these social events that happen, festival events that happen. And so this whole game feels like just a more two-dimensional festival aspect, and the festival side of Lord of the Rings Online is like a 3%, 4% of what you could do in the game, and so it's interesting that they thought this was worth an entire game.
And it's interesting that the very first thing that they tell you about it is the phrase "forage friendships." Forage.
I mean,
French.
Are they trying to say forge, but they misspelled it?
Dude, I hadn't thought about that. You forge friend. I bet you're right. I bet this is a misspelling. It's not like you're like digging in that would be musty really undergrowth sad. For friendships.
It would be really sad if
it's gotta be forge.
Yeah, I bet. I could just feel like that's the word. I mean, maybe someone was trying to be overly clever, and it's like we were going to, instead of foraging, we're going to forage, because everything's pastoral and everything is agricultural, and so but you don't forage friendships. That's not what happens.
I think they probably got it wrong. Let's not give them the credit that they deserve, that they're actually trying to do something interesting with the word, because the word never means what they think it means there.
Well, and also, let's be clear, you never forage anything. You forage for something.
You're right.
So
it's got to be forge friendships.
That word requires the preposition for after it. Forage for something, for the direct object of that action. And so foraging friendships is just I mean, look, I know this is, I'm a pedantic man because I've taught literature I'm a medieval historian. So it's something that I care about, and probably a lot of people don't, especially in the age, especially Gen Zers. But words do mean something, and Tolkien was a philologist, and he would have probably had a cringe at this.
This is a total mistake. This is a typo. I'm 100% certain of this, because the very next image they show us right here, it's two people walking together down a path. He's not like looking in the undergrowth for all the hobbit women,
digging through the undergrowth and finding someone and pulling them out. Look,
here's my friendship I foraged for. Let's mix it with the grilled onions. No, forage friendships. Okay, let's see where they go from foraging foraging friendship. Well, maybe she's foraging there. Look, she's digging right next to
she's foraging something. Is she going to be friends with the moss on the rock? Is that what's going on? Like,
it looks like, what is that? I don't know what that is. Okay, don't stop. All right. It's just really a lot of walking. It doesn't really tell me anything what you're doing in this game either. So maybe there's something fun in there, but at least games like...
I have to say, I'm really glad to see diversity has come.
Oh my gosh, you're right. There it is. Well, they are taking their cues from the Rings of Power with these hobbits. I just hope we get to see them leave some by the side of the road to die. Just like the Harfoots. That would be fun. If you could, maybe you have a path, right? You choose the good hobbit or the bad hobbit. Good hobbit, bad Harfoot.
And maybe the bad hobbit, you're kind of like you're a wolf in sheep's clothing, and you lock people in your pantry until they die.
That'd be cool. Right. Or you go on a walk with them, and you slightly injure them, and you're like, sorry, got to leave you on the side of the road. I'm walking home by yourself.
It has a trip button. You trip them and they fall. Leave to die. Continue on path.
All right. Cutting food. It's so cool. There you go. We can decorate our home. Wonderful. It's so beautiful. Okay. Look at all those different modern looks that we can put into there. You can have different gardens. You can have garden beds. Yep. Different seasons. Apples, I guess. Explore Bywater. So is it Hobbiton or Bywater? Maybe you're in Bywater.
You're in Bywater. It's not.
Are you?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So you're definitely not in Hobbiton.
There was a Gandalf moment.
Of the Shire.
These are our tales of the Shire. Welcome home, Hobbit. Here are your tales.
Hobbits really are amazing creatures.
That's not a quote from the book, though. Is it? I always think that is.
Hobbits really are amazing creatures. I feel
something like that is the book.
Yeah.
Not enough to say that.
Yeah, well, we can figure that out by just typing in the search. But
it says it's coming 2024, I guess, to the Nintendo Switch, maybe more. But it's just a Lord of the Rings game, and I was thoroughly underwhelmed.
Right. So go ahead.
The Gollum game looked a little bit better actually on their first release. I was like, it doesn't look half bad. I was a little more interested in that. But this year, I've never been a huge fan of like sim type games either. Animal Crossing, The Sims.
Well, that's just it. I don't think this was made for you. And it wasn't made for me either. But here's what I do find fascinating, as you brought up the Gollum game. This feels like just the other extreme. You know how you can go to one extreme and then the pendulum always swings back to the extreme. The Gollum is everything ugly and evil about Lord of the Rings, and you play a creature that can do nothing but evil. That's just varieties of evil. Some of them less, some of them more. In the Gollum game, it was terrible. Now it swings back, and now we have a game that's focused solely on. Let's face it. The Shire was one of the look of the Shire was one of the great hooks from the movies, where and it's the thing people still quote about the setup in the Hobbiton setup in New Zealand, and where there's something about the Shire culture which is deeply attractive. It was to Tolkien when he wrote it. it is a lot of people. And insert joke about the woman that asked about where your Shire is from all of our audio
from all our interviews,
audio interviews that we've done podcasts on from 20 something years ago. But anyway, I just feel like they've taken and focused on the entire other extreme. There probably are people who find this artistic. Even they don't mind the fact that it's not technically impressive. They just like sim games. There are clearly there's a whole audience for sim games.
Yeah,
and this just feels like a sim game, a harmless sim game with little conflict, where it's just all about eating and gardening and socializing and growing your little hobbit home.
And I have a feeling we're going to be seeing more of this, because once the Embracer Group bought the rights to all this Lord of the Rings stuff that Lord of the Rings Enterprises Middle Earth Enterprises used to have, we're going to start seeing these games. And this is I guess it's just a Switch game. I didn't look it up. If it is, fine. If it's maybe it requires touch or something like that. I'm not. These are not my kind of games, right? And I would find it much more interesting to do more than just be in the Shire, because for me, I always like, we'll get that into the Barrow-downs, is like the character of Middle Earth, the entirety of Middle Earth has to come out. And so if they strip the hobbits of their courageousness, right? Meaning if it's just a sim game and all you're doing is like living life and spreading butter on bread and fishing and all that, like, you lose a large part of what makes hobbits unique in Middle Earth, is that, the smallest person is overcoming here, and they're not doing that at all in what they've shown us yet. So I'm judging it harshly, but I tend to do that with everything that I see at first glance.
I mean, look, this is Middle Earth Utopia, and then we just had a failure of a game that was Middle Earth Dystopia, which is, and so between those two, there should be some great games, but apparently they're not being made.
Well, here's to hoping that these hobbits will visit the Barrow-downs and experience real danger before succeeding with their own home.
There you go.
All right. So let's get into this change this week for Down with the Barrow-downs. Last week we talked about Tom Bombadil and how he was completely excised from the films, how he has no more place in Middle-earth when it comes to the films. And in a way, Tolkien kind of agreed with him. He kind of said, yeah, he's not an important character to the narrative. He's okay as an adventure along the way, which is also verbatim what he said. I needed an adventure along the way. But he is not critical to the story. However,
to build on what we said last week too, I mean, at least my opinion, and I think you agreed with me, was Tom Bombadil is a different kind of character.
Yes.
One of the reasons that Tolkien could easily say that was he's a mystery, and what he is he's fairy. That's my opinion, based on Tolkien's essay about the land of fairy and what fairy is. And so he and Goldberry are both fairy, and the old forest is just the realm of fairy, but which happens to be situated in Middle Earth. From a physical, like you could actually walk there, as opposed to the realm of fairy. Usually you have to do something or follow someone, and in order to be transported, and it's kind of like a different dimension, the way we think about things nowadays. But so I just think Tom Bombadil was easily left aside. Barrow-downs, however, have a deeper connection, and they are tied to a bunch of other things that tie to other things in Tolkien's world. They are part of the network. And in fact, there's a major event that happens in the Barrow-downs, which we don't see the payoff until Return of the King. But anyone that did not read the books will have totally missed and not seen nor understood what was going on. I mean, the way Jackson filmed the Return of the King and the scene that we're going to talk about in a second, you didn't need to, because it didn't enter into it.
Yeah.
It is just one of those examples where when you read the Barrow-downs story, and then you see the payoff in the Return of the King, it's just fascinating, because it again is a sign of Tolkien's master storytelling.
All right,
everything's woven together.
Yeah. All right. So let's take a look at this clip, as related as it is to the Barrow-downs. Down with the Barrow-downs.
These are for you. Keep them close. Stay here.
All right. There are your swords, hobbitses. Here's your run-of-the-mill, large, long daggers, essentially. and use these in the future. Now that is completely different from the story of how they actually get the swords in this chapter. And so fog on the Barrow-downs, right? That's chapter's name, Fog on the Barrow-downs.
Correct.
And so when I saw this in the films, I'm like, oh, that's right. That's how they get the swords here, because I'd forgotten. Like they jumped so far forward that all of a sudden they need swords, and this is where they got them from. Okay, so but before we jump into what the Barrow-downs are and some more details on that, I want to read these couple quotes from Peter Jackson, where he starts talking about their choices to remove things like Bombadil, and he mentions the Barrow-downs as well. So here's what he said. This is from his book, Peter Jackson, A Filmmaker's Journey, which he did with Brian Sibley, who has also done a bunch of, I believe he also did the radio drama, the BBC radio drama, and he also did some of the behind the scenes books, and he did the Fall of Numenor book too. I believe he put that together. So he's well versed in all things Middle Earth, and he helped Peter Jackson put this book together, Peter Jackson, A Filmmaker's Journey. Here's what Peter Jackson said. Once you start going to the next level of detail below the main story points, that's when you run up against the hard decisions, which is basically a case of, we can't include everything, so what's our strategy? What do we want to focus on? You think beyond what your favorite bits are. You think beyond what your favorite bits are, and you look at it in greater terms. Let me start over. You think beyond what your favorite bits are, and you look at it in terms of a greater strategy, which in our case was really keeping a relationship between Frodo and the ring, keeping the events totally focused on the forward movement of the journey. This really explains to some degree why Tom Bombadil, Old Man Willow, and the Barrow-wights aren't there, because once Frodo left Hobbiton in the movie, we wanted everything at that point to point to his advance his journey to Rivendell and ultimately to Mordor. So, right, they had to always think like, okay, we're getting to Mordor. What advances that journey forward? And they felt that Bombadil, Old Man Willow, and the Barrow-wights didn't do that. Now, in addition to that, he also said this about the Hobbit's journey from Hobbiton to Bree. This is from the same book. The cinematic coverage of the Hobbit's journey to Bree was done in such a way that when you cut back to these four hobbits scurrying through the trees and peering at the Bree gates, we figured that they could have seen Tom spend a couple of days at his house and had their experience on the Barrow-downs. There's nothing in the movie that says that those things didn't happen. We didn't eradicate Tom Bombadil from the mythology. It was simply that in the movie, we chose to show selected aspects of the journey. So,
so that's cope. That's cope because mild cope, because that's clearly not true with regard to the weapons that are received, which is why you did the clip that you did.
Yeah.
So in other words, they wouldn't have needed swords from Aragorn if they had arrived at. See, what's interesting is if you really intended that, they would have arrived in Bree and they would have had swords on their hips, right? They also wouldn't have had the same clothes. But anyway,
that's true.
Whatever. You wouldn't have needed the Aragorn scene giving them blades, but clearly the story was otherwise. But anyway, back to the main point. Aside from the mild cope in that statement, the main point I can see totally from a filmmaker's perspective and a director's perspective. Right? He says we have an arc to do. It's getting Frodo to Mordor. We simply do not have the time to cover everything. So when you ask yourself what has to be cut, it's going to be the stuff that doesn't get us directly to Mordor. And it is true that the events in the Crick Hollow and the events in the Old Forest and the events at Tom Bombadil's house and the events in the Barrow-downs contribute nothing to getting Frodo to Mordor. I mean, there's a geographic space that they cover, but you could just say that they traveled there between Hobbiton and Bree. And so you got these four aspects. They don't actually directly, they are kind of a side story. They don't actually directly get Frodo there. So I get that from a filmmaker's perspective, but that is why the books are so much better, because you get the wider, fuller, deeper, richer picture of Tolkien's world that you get to enjoy. And frankly, also, this is Tolkien's first foray into like what I would consider real horror. Is in the Barrow-downs, so he has that literary shift sometimes in his work where he's writing horror. He does it in Shelob's Lair, and in the Barrow-down we have the exact same situation. Like it's straight out of like the scene that Frodo sees in the Barrow under the ground is straight out of a horror movie. It's like it's impressive.
And I will say. Andy Serkis's reading of this chapter is great. Like the voice that he gives to the Barrow-wight is actually really creepy and well done. Because he has such a nice timbre to his voice, especially when he goes low and he gets the air into it. So yeah, nice. I really like the way that he did the Barrow-wight. Right, it was frightening.
Definitely gonna have to check it out.
It's worth listening to.
So maybe we should cover the basics of what happens in the Barrow-downs just to remind people.
And let's talk about what the Barrow is first too. Okay. Because the hobbits don't really know either. And even coming out of it in the end, it's hard for us to know what it is without like rereading the whole section where Tom's kind of explaining, but not like in historical terms of what those are. So what are the Barrows? Okay. Do you want to take it?
No. You. I know you have a reference for this part, and I'll read what the text actually says in the Fellowship of the Ring. But go ahead.
Okay. So the Barrows, and this is something that I'd forgotten actually until I started looking at this. I'm like, they were actually built. So a barrow officially means a prehistoric grave mound. And that's what a barrow is. A down is essentially a small hill, a small rolling hill. So a prehistoric grave mound that is actually bigger than just a grave mound. It's actually more of a hill. That's kind of what a barrow down means. And so these were graves. One, in the first stage, the ancestors of the Edain, the Númenóreans, lived there and constructed these barrows as graves for their leaders or for their people. I don't think it ever specifies exactly who is in there at that point, because once we get to this third age, where Frodo's there and we learn some more about it, it's actually in the second age, where after the kingdom, Arnor is split up into Cardolan. Michael and I were fighting about which way to pronounce that. Cardolan, Arthedain, Ruadan,
Cardolan, and Rhudaur.
Rhudaur. Okay, so I never remember those names. Those was always rough for me. So those are split up. So for them, the barrow that they're in is actually a second age barrow of the last prince of Cardolan, I believe is what is explained. So barrows, that's why it's important. Now the white, you might think like, oh, this is the ghost of the Prince of Cardolan. No. It is not the ghost. The Barrow-wights were released by the Witch King of Angmar in the Angmar Wars and taken there to essentially haunt the Barrow-downs, to haunt those places.
Right. After Cardolan was defeated, the Witch King, as a kind of act of revenge, sends these spirits, these Barrow-wights, to inhabit bodies of some kind, which is what spirits do. We ran into that in the Silmarillion quite a few times. Evil spirits that come in and infest whatever. Wolves, then that makes them werewolves. Bats, that makes them vampires. There's the spirits that assaulted the moon when the moon and the sun came out. There's wights and wraiths that inhabit bodies. So
and Tolkien actually, this is in Return of the Shadow, chapter 6 on Tom Bombadil again. Tolkien makes the point that he actually has this question written that, are Black Riders actually horsed Barrow-wights? So at the point that he started writing this, he was thinking like maybe they're the same thing, because to him there was the relationship between the Witch King of Angmar releasing the whites into the Barrow-downs. Although I don't know if he'd even written that at that point. It's hard to know how much he's retconning and how much he's creating on the fly and how much was already there when he's writing this. So anyway,
what I found to be hilarious and cool was that the Barrow-wight, when Frodo wakes up and the other hobbits are asleep still under some spell, and Frodo is the only one awake, and he has to face this Barrow-wight who's speaking to him, but he can't see. The Barrow-wight begins an incantation, but it's a song of sorts, because of course it is, because this is Tolkien, and everyone, including the wraiths, sing. So the song is not a song that a Cardolan prince would sing. This is a song of a creature of evil, who's completely dedicated to the Dark Lord Morgoth and Sauron. He said the song is, or the incantation as it's called, but it's written in verse form. Cold be hand and heart and bone, and cold be sleep under stone. Never more to wake on stony bed, never till the sun fails and the moon is dead. I found that cool because the wraiths, these evil spirits, they hate the moon and the sun because they assaulted it in the first stage under Morgoth. In the black wind, the stars shall die, and still on gold here let them lie, till the dark Lord lifts his hand over dead sea and withered land. So here's a creature completely committed to destruction, nihilism, and serving the Dark Lord. He is defeated when Frodo goes after a dead hand, walking across in very It style across the ground towards the throats of his companions. Frodo takes a sword at hand and smashes it against the hand and causes a snarl, and all the lights go dark. And then Frodo remembers to call out to Tom Bombadil, and Tom Bombadil hears him and comes. And Tom Bombadil opens the grave and drives out the wights, which in a very Tom Bombadil fashion. So he has all of his no less than 5 different songs that he used over the next few pages that he sings with regard to the, basically driving out the wights and freeing the hobbits and then lifting their spirits. One of the more interesting things is when Merry wakes up, he references the history that you referenced, but he does it as someone who he has a dream from one of the men of Cardolan. So what that tells you is that it isn't just about these evil spirits that have come to inhabit the grave, but somehow the spirit of the dead man is there too, because he says, what in the name of wonder began Merry, feeling the golden circlet that had slipped over one eye? Because, of course, the Barrow-wight dresses them up in the clothing of the dead. Then he stopped, and a shadow came over his face, and he closed his eyes. Of course, I remember, he said. The men of Carn Dûm came on us at night, and we were worsted. Ah, the spear in my heart. He clutched at his breast. No, he said, opening his eyes. What am I saying? I've been dreaming. Where did you get to, Frodo? So clearly he had the dream of probably the man whose circlet he was wearing, which was a nobleman, maybe the prince himself of Cardolan, that was killed by being stabbed through the heart by a spear. The Carn Dûm is the capital of Angmar, the Witch King's realm, which waged war for centuries against the kingdoms of Arnor, the 3 kingdoms that you mentioned, Arthedain, Rhudaur, and Cardolan. And so he's got this dream from them. And then Tom Bombadil says a couple things that are interesting, and this is the key connector with the rest of the story. That we're gonna come back to. Tom, it wasn't Aragorn giving them a bunch of dirty swords on Weathertop. It was Tom Bombadil giving them these swords from the Barrow, the treasures of the Barrow. And he says 2 things. First, he chooses a brooch for himself, which is interesting because Tom Bombadil, we tend to think of these kinds of spirits maybe as like a spirit like Tom, whatever he is, shouldn't care that much about treasure, and he doesn't. He just leaves it to that. But he picks a single brooch out for a Goldberry, actually. And he says, here's a pretty toy for Tom and for his lady. Fair was she who long ago wore this on her shoulder. Goldberry shall wear it now, and we will not forget her. So he's paying homage to the lady of Cardolan that the brooch belonged to by carrying it back to Goldberry and having Goldberry wear it, which is very cool, very medieval. And then he says, for each of the hobbits, he chose a dagger, long, leaf-shaped, and keen, of marvelous workmanship, damasked with serpent forms in red and gold. They gleamed as he drew them from their black sheaths, wrought of some strange metal, light and strong and set with many fiery stones. Whether by some virtue in these sheaths or because of the spell that lay on the mound, blades seem untouched by time, unrusted, sharp, glittering in the sun. So different from those, okay? There's some dirty swords, and these things are glittering and worked in red and gold, and the metal. He calls out that the metal itself of the blades, the hobbits would know what iron and steel and bronze and those other things are. So it's not any of that. So it's some other metal that clearly the men of Cardolan were able to work, and it has a special purpose. But we'll find that out later. And their blades were leaf-shaped. The one leaf-shaped blade in the movie is Sting, has a leaf-shaped blade. So when I imagine them, I imagine fancier Sting because of the red and gold and the fiery stones. Like they're jeweled. These are the weapons of noblemen. and so it's pretty cool. But there's more to it than that. So
I wonder if in the films, I mean, I do know that they knew the Lord of the Rings well, and
yes,
this has got to be one of those moments where they're like, guys, how are we going to do this? How are we going to get them their swords? Because they're important swords. And I bet somebody was like, forget it. Just Aragorn's got them. He's going to throw them on the ground. They're going to grab them. We can't do more than that. We can't have a whole backstory to the swords anymore.
And they had to do that, right? Because the hobbits left the Shire and they didn't have any weapons. And that's been the whole thing. Hobbits weapons are not a thing that hobbits carry around normally. They don't need them in the Shire. And so we know that the hobbits don't have weapons. And then they're about to use the weapons and brandish them, or at least brandish them on Weathertop against the Nazgul. So they need to get them something, they need to show how they got them somehow. Yeah. And that's how they chose to do it. Sadly.
So Tom Bombadil, he goes in, he comes out with all this stuff. He gets them their swords. Now, Michael, why is that important? Why are these swords more important than the swords given by Aragorn to the hobbits in the films?
Okay, so these swords are, and this is the key, this is the master storytelling thing. And let me just say, for the record, for this whole topic, this is not obviously a major storytelling point. This is just one of the many details that gives the richness to Tolkien's story, that sets it apart and makes it a classic. This kind of thing that is why Tolkien is so well loved. So these blades are barely mentioned. They are mentioned in passing, but nothing special about them a couple times throughout the rest of the books, until the Return of the King, until a climactic moment. And that climactic moment is, of course, the scene that we have already discussed as well in other podcasts for different reasons. But that is the scene of the confrontation, first between the Witch King of Angmar and Theoden. And so the Witch King's fell beast kills Theoden's horse and crushes Theoden. And then he's about to feast on him. And Éowyn reveals herself. And then we get the prophecy. And the Witch King laughs at her. And Éowyn faces up to him. Unlike anyone else around, she and Merry are the only ones that face up to him. And of course, they defeat him. But how they defeat him is really interesting in light of the Barrow-downs. So
well,
I don't know.
Here's the clip from the films that you're talking about. Very short clip, but important. So that clip right there, where he is doing that.
There he is. There's our screenshot. So he's stabbing his blade into the back of the knee of the Witch King. Now, I love it because they did the visuals right for this. You even have like this white light coming out, which actually might even be appropriate given what we then find out from the book. So in the movie, it's just Merry stabs him in the knee. He goes down. He's vulnerable. Éowyn stabs him in the face, and the Witch King's defeated. But in the book, it makes it clear that this is a moment where there is something else happening, and it's because of the blade that they got in the Barrow-downs. Mm-hmm. And so after this scene, after the fall of the Witch King, and after Éowyn when they think she's dead, she's herself fallen. Éomer comes up. Éomer then sees the death of the king. He's now the king. Then he leaves, and Meriadoc, as he is often called in noble moments, Tolkien switches from Merry to Meriadoc. This is from the Battle of Pelennor Fields chapter, and so Éomer leaves, and he leaves with this awesome, he over the field rang his clear voice calling, "Death, ride to ruin in the world's ending." So the Rohirrim go off on this death charge to basically keep attacking until they die, they think. And so they sweep away. And still Meriadoc the Hobbit stood there blinking through his tears, and no one spoke to him. Indeed, none seemed to heed him. He brushed away the tears and stooped to pick up the green shield that Éowyn had given him, and he slung it on his back. Then he looked for his sword that he had let fall. For even as he struck his blow, his arm was numbed, and now he could only use his left hand. And behold, there lay his weapon, but the blade was smoking like a dry branch that has been thrust into a fire, and as he watched it, it writhed and withered and was consumed. So passed the sword of the Barrow-downs, work of Westernesse. But glad would he have been to know its fate who wrought it slowly, long ago in the North Kingdom, when the Dunedain were young, and chief among their foes was the dread realm of Angmar and its sorcerer king. No other blade, not though mightier hands had wielded it, would have dealt that foe a wound so bitter, cleaving the undead's flesh, breaking the spell that knit his unseen sinews to his will. So, in one sentence, Tolkien explains how awesome this blade is, which is that it was for this very purpose to cleave undead flesh and break the spell that knit their sinews to their will. So we know that wraiths have a physical form, even though you can't see it, but they have this unseen flesh because they're a spirit that has inhabited this body corpse thing. And these blades of Westernesse were made to break that spell. Eowyn would have done nothing even if she had got a clean shot in, if it weren't for Merry's blade breaking that spell. And so, which is why the Witch King is one of the many reasons the Witch King is so confident, because basically he has this protection by his nature. His unnature, but he has this protection, which this one blade just so happened to be on the battlefield at the right time in the hands of a warrior that no one paid attention to, who could then deal that blow. So fantastic ending to the prophecy of Glorfindel, the ancient prophecy of Glorfindel about not by hand of man will he be slain.
I love in the books in this part that how the patchwork of the histories of Middle Earth that you're given glimpses of through these other parts, whether it's the Witch King now was the Witch King then, you don't really realize that necessarily that's what they're talking about until you read it a second or third time. Like it's not obvious, it's not clear, because you don't connect the Barrow-wights that happened so early in the book to his death at the end readily. It's not something you that is obvious, and that's why when these things are stitched together, it makes the story in the world so much greater. And the idea of eucatastrophe, even in that they needed to get to the Barrow-wights to defeat, like they needed to have this Tom Bombadil thing. They needed to be rescued by him in a way. Tom Bombadil had a hand in defeating Sauron, ultimately by defeating the Witch King of Angmar. And
right.
I love that depth, and you do lose some of that in the films, and it is sad, especially all about, like you mentioned, the importance of that sword and how it was wrought especially for the purpose of destroying the wraiths, to unknit the sinews of flesh. So that's the big thing we lose. The Tom Bombadil episode, you don't lose that kind of an important piece of hardware, piece of the story.
Yep. Now, ultimately, is it catastrophic to the story to remove that? And we'll answer that as we go through our questions.
All right. So let's do that. Let's get through our questions. The first of which is it lore friendly? Is it lore friendly to remove
the Barrow-downs?
The Barrow-downs. I am going to say no. It is not lore friendly. I think it's an important piece of lore, and just throwing out Billy Bob's Bree swords down at the feet of the hobbits is a loss. So I feel like no, it's not lore friendly to completely remove the Barrow-downs from the films.
Okay, I'm going to take the same tack to answer the question that as I do with all the other ones where Peter Jackson just removes an entire section. And when I answer the question, not just is it lore friendly in the sense that it removes lore, because all of this, every removal removes lore, but is it critical to the story, or in some way where they've removed something? And I have to actually land on it's actually okay that he does this, even though I love what I just read. I actually think it's, from the definition of removal, it's not lore unfriendly, and so that suffices for this. So I'm going to go with yes. It is actually lore friendly because of how minor that detail is. Cool, rich, and wonderful as it is, nevertheless, it is a minor detail, and it does not make it unfriendly to the lore to remove that piece.
So you're saying being able to kill the Witch King of Angmar with the proper hardware is completely lore friendly. Like if you remove that, it's totally fine.
No, it's not completely. It's not completely. I just can't swing
on a
between
scale.
two pendulums.
I get you.
It just doesn't cross the line of being detrimental to the lore enough to make it lore unfriendly. So I'm
That
gonna go with
pendulum
yes.
in my head, there's this big magnet on the no side that always somehow pulls that pendulum toward it more
That's right.
so than perhaps it does
That's
for
right.
you. So we split on that one. It is lore friendly. Is it lore friendly? Michael says yes. I say no. So let's get to the next question. Does the change make for better cinema? This is hard. Michael, what do you think?
Yes, I think yes for the same reason as we said last week, and that is that it makes for better cinema because it's a big story, a big chunk, including Tom Bombadil and a bunch of stuff from Tom Bombadil. Which, if you're going to cut one piece, which you already talked about Tom Bombadil, it doesn't actually, except for the one detail that we lovingly pointed out because we like it so much, it doesn't actually make for better cinema to include what would have had to have been like a whole 20 minutes extra of the movie in order to accurately show their journey through the Barrow-downs, them falling asleep on the down, them waking up in the Barrow.
But what about them running around naked on the grassy hill of the Barrow-down?
They're running around without clothes. Yeah, they would have had the hard R rating if they had gone with the full text.
I will say the creepiness of this episode I think is missed. There's you get some of the creepy stuff. It's a little bit more on the schlock horror, particularly when you get the extended edition of the Paths of the Dead with the giant mound of skulls that comes tumbling out of all the doorways and windows of the interior mausoleum. It seems like. But does it, I might surprise you. Yes, I think it does make for better cinema. You could, like you said, in this film, adding all that would have been really difficult, and trying to explain, okay, so you need the sword that's made from 4,000 years ago in order to actually destroy you can't explain all that in
and then
the film.
And then what are you going to do about how they escape from the Barrow? Because you can't, you took out Tom Bombadil, so you can't put this
I
in
know
without Tom Bombadil.
Arwen could have come and helped them escape.
Well, you will find, in my opinion, when it comes to the removal of Glorfindel, is different from my opinion about the removal of the Barrow-downs.
Yes. Okay. All right. Okay. Cool. So how much do you like the change? Okay. So this is an emotional reaction to me. The midpoint is 3. That's exactly where I am in my average. Michael is slightly above that at 3.2 on a scale of 1 to 5. So 1 is the lowest we can give it. I understand the change, but I still don't like the change. I understand. Does that make sense? I understand why it needed to be done, but I don't like it because it removes that texture of Middle Earth that makes it so wonderful to wrap around you, that history is in there, right? It just, you lose some of that. So I'm going to go a little bit lower than 3. I'm going to go 2.7. 2.7. I think that's where I'm going to land. 2.7. Michael, what do you think?
So last week we talked about whether we liked the change of them removing Tom Bombadil, and we both scored very high. We liked them removing him. My reason for that, and I think you somewhat agreed with me, was they would have done a terrible job if they tried to put him in. So I'm really glad they left him out for that reason. Would they have done a terrible job if they had put in the Barrow-downs? I don't think so. I think they could have pulled off the Barrow-downs as long as they don't do the Mountain of Skulls. That schlocky element, which comes from Jackson's previous cinematic history, film history, I think is silly. But there are other places, parts of Shelob's lair, parts of Mordor, other darker elements that really do. Even the Nazgul themselves, which I think.
That's the point.
He does a good job. So I think they could have pulled it off. So I'm not going to say I like the change for that reason. Do I like the change in general? Of course not. But it is so kind of necessary for a cinema to, if you're removing Bombadil, it would have, if they had put it in and not had Bombadil, it would have been so disjointed that they would have had to come up with some other weird random ending to that story. It would have changed it. So I'm just going to flat this one. I'm going to go 3.0 because I'm not confident in their ability to do it really well. And I miss out the fact that we don't have the Blades of Westernesse, but On the other hand, if they had tried to do it, I think it would have been terrible. Just not as bad as Tom Bombadil. So that's mine.
Yeah, that's I could go up to 3. I could go down to 2.5, but I'm going to sit right there in the middle between the two because I do feel like it's a loss. And if my reasoning for not giving it a higher score would be that they couldn't put Tom Bombadil in, I'm trying to separate that out. So speaking of that, then let's get into our extended edition and talk about let's brainstorm about what they could have done to get them out of the Barrow-downs if Tom Bombadil wasn't there. No idea is a bad idea. That's not completely true. It's just never, guys, if anybody tells you that's not completely true, there are ideas that are going to be bad ideas, like Arwen, you take them out of the Barrow-downs. So, but we'll talk about that. We'll go into our extended edition.
Okay. And so I guess, so we're done here.
Yeah.
Are we going to do next week? Are we going to do one of these, or what are we going to do?
I don't know. Yeah, we'll probably do another one of these here. I think we'll do these for the rest of May. And then we'll do the War of the Rohirrim. And then we'll get into a longer book that we can all follow along with. Hey, John from the Tolkien Road is doing the Lord of the Rings in a very slow way, which I appreciate. It's a great podcast. Go look for Tolkien Road and listen to his. I mean, you can listen to ours still, right? I appreciate that, but Tolkien Road is going like it's going to be a probably 5 or 6 year process. It sounds like because he's not through chapter 1 yet after like 4 or 5 episodes, so it's going to be a long process for him to get through it all. But I'd like to do something like that. Probably not with Lord of the Rings. I think there's other things that we can do. We'll get into that. If you want to hear us talk about what they should have done with the Barrow-downs if they were going to try and include it without Tom Bombadil, we'll get into our extended edition. You can get that by going to theonereader.com/member or theonereader.com/Patreon and get a month free on if you sign up through our site, or a week free if you sign up on Patreon. And we'll also talk about what was lost with Frodo from by not having him in the Barrow-downs, because he is kind of heroic there too. He's the one that sets things in motion there.
Yeah, we have I think it's our first reference to Hobbit courage in the Fellowship of the Ring.
Yeah. So we'll talk about that both from Billiam and Mandy, who sent those over. So join us there, guys. We'll see you on the other side. Thanks for joining us this week. One more to go next week, and then one more after that.
Have a great week, freeloaders.